Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that bridges wisdom from generation to generation. And today's guest is Ian Shen. Ian loves learning and teaching, having taught English in Japan for over 20 years. He's a man of many hats, whose interest has led him to become an international preacher, professional actor in Hollywood, and an award-nominated short film producer-director. Now, as a strategic results life coach, trained by Tony Robbins and Chloe Madonis, Ian's mission is to help others strengthen their mindset and emotional resilience to know themselves better so they can become vehicles of empathy and impact in service of the world. So in our conversation today, we talk about just that. We talk about how to model empathy. We talk about how to have civic dialogue and engagement and the lessons that he learned at teaching English in Japan. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Ian, and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast. I am thrilled to have you on today and have our conversation around who knows what we dive into today.
That's right.
So with our first question of the day that we always ask every single person we interview is, what is your definition of impactful leadership, and how does impactful leadership show up in your everyday life?
Thing. Well, first, thank you, Justin, for really giving me the opportunity to participate in what you're doing. I remember being on Twitter and being drawn to your own little profile blurb about human potential, and I figured, this person sounds interesting. So I'm very glad to see what you're doing and being honored to be a part of this. Answering that question, I've thought a lot about it since you've asked me to participate in this podcast. And I think actually when we first met, you asked the question online about what is leadership. And I tried to really, in the past week or so, kind of think about, what do you mean by impactful leadership? And what's leadership? Like, aren't they one and the same? You know what I mean? And as I thought about it, I realized that actually everybody's leading. And I thought, I'm not doing a podcast. You are. And so I thought, in a sense, Justin's leading, just by doing something that's visible. And whether people follow his lead or not, that's, really up to them, right? But you are actually taking the initiative to lead. And I realized that, everybody's actually leading all the time, but it's not necessarily good leadership or bad lead. I mean, it's not the best leadership, not going anywhere, right? And then how do you then create the distinction of what's impactful? I guess I usually use the word transformational. That's that which changes the people who follow you, changes yourself as a leader, changes the people who follow you, as well as impacting and transforming the context or community or situation that you're in. You know what I mean? Kind of expanding further beyond yourself. So I think for myself, if I were to make a distinction between just regular leadership, impactful leadership and transformational type leadership is much more intentional, deliberate. It recognizes the needs of those who wish to participate in what you're leading them toward. I've heard of, I've actually listened to a few of your podcasts. I think it was Nikki who talked about self-leadership and the importance of that. And so I think part of that impactful leadership is that it changes the leader as well as they lead, But ultimately, I think there's an exponential component that I see. I know we'll probably touch upon this, but as a teacher, I'm aware of the students that I'm teaching and what the impact they will have in the future. Do you know what I mean? So I'm very mindful of, what I'm teaching them now, I hope will multiply and expand exponentially. Do you know what I mean? Beyond me. And that to me, them going out into the world and making an impact, ultimately, I think is a definition of a person, of a leader who's mindful of the impact they're having, and that it extends beyond this little group that you have right now.
Yes, 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. I really like where you talk about like being very intentional about leadership. I think in terms of the impact and then impacting that next generation, right? You talked a lot. I probably could go a lot of different ways with what you said, but since we're focused on bridging impact and focusing on the next generation, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about, being mindful of the impact, not only that you have when you're, a teacher or a coach or someone working with youth, but how do you understand that your actions affect others and that they're going to go on and be the future?
Yeah. Let me back up a second. What
Please.
comes to mind for me about just in terms of leadership and any movement you want to start. I don't know if you've ever followed those TED Talks of one particular person by the name of Derek Sivers. I think back in 2010, he did a TED Talk on how to start a movement. That's the title of it. You should just Google it and watch it sometime. But basically, he shows this video of a man who gets up to dance. And the man is just dancing I don't know if there was music, but he just gets up. It's just one lone person on probably a park in San Francisco, He's just dancing around, just moving around. It looks so much fun. Now, of course, if you're sitting there in the park, you're just watching, you're like, oh my God, what a crazy person, right?
Yeah, right.
He's just like dancing and maybe some music, but he's just all by himself. But he's just dancing away. Then someone else gets up and joins him. And then he's also dancing away. Next thing you know, like one person after another gets in on this dancing, right? And so before you know it, there's this huge crowd of people dancing. That to me is just an example of leadership, but it's kind of like nobody planned it. It's not conscious at all, not intentional. And that guy who started it, I don't think he set out necessarily to be a leader, right? So it's just kind of
having a good time.
Yeah, he's just having his good time doing what he felt he should be doing at that moment, right?
Yeah.
So there's some element of that when you're leading is kind of okay, I have a vision of what I want to do, right? And I'm just going to live it out 100%. And let's see who sees that, resonates with that, and wants to participate. Right? I think that's first phase of it, right? Yeah. Once you get people on board, you attract them, and you're attracting the type of people who resonate with you. Like, you're not forcing them to join you. Now, this is, of course, different if you're in a different context, like a company where you join.
And you're like an authority figure or whatnot.
But at the same time, though, if you're in a company, usually when you're hiring, you hire people who resonate with your company values. So assuming that people who come to you for an interview already resonate with your company, right? Like if you're interviewing somebody and they don't jive with your culture, your company culture or value, you're not going to bring them on board because they're not going to be on board as a follower 100%.
Right.
So I think as a leader, being mindful of what it is that you stand for, your values, right?
Yeah.
And that you are clear about that and can convey that by, in a sense, really embodying it in you. Most people follow people because they are somewhat charismatic. There's a lot of charismatic people we know that people follow, right?
Right.
No one follows kind of blah, 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 boring people.
Man.
Yeah. Or you got to have something that people go, I want.
Little pizzazz.
There you go. Yeah. A little pizzazz. You got something that I want to touch.
Right.
And now that you're living in LA, you can there's that ethos of celebrityism all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. So influencers, you name it. Yeah. So I think that's, one element of that. I know some people call it the it thing. Some people call it charisma. I tend to view it as, don't worry about those fancy words. It's really just committed to being yourself. Right? Yeah. Committed truly to what you believe, what you feel you want to create into this world. Right. That's I think the beginning of really great, impactful leadership. Because if you can be clear about what you're passionate about and what you see and where you think, what kind of world you want to build, like maybe you and I resonate on that. We want to help people reach their full human potential.
Yes.
Then we can create a world that is full of love, empathy, and positivity, coming from a real place, right? And it depends on each one of us. And if that's the type of world that we want to create, then we have to somehow articulate that. And I think you're doing great having a podcast saying, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to start in this little context, which is not necessarily insignificant, but coaching youth, for example, young leaders.
Hey.
Great. That's where it begins for you, in your context.
Yeah, most certainly.
Yeah.
And kind of what I'm almost hearing that in there is like, you got to be honest with yourself. And I think this is something that I kind of I've gone through as just a young leader in general and just being a young human is figuring yourself out, right? Like we had a conversation pre-pod, talking about, both of our own journeys, right? But I've gone through, so I'm from a small town and right now I'm in a major city, but in the midst of that transition, I was trying to figure myself out in college, right? Am I this, big partier business guy? Am I this kind, nonprofit dude, right? And, I'm a person that kind of goes all into one thing. And I'm learning to work with a lot more and things can exist. Like I can be a very kind-hearted individual and also enjoy, having a good time on the weekends, like that. Those both can exist.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah.
And in society, all the time we're thinking about all or nothing. And so I had to start being more mindful about that and more mindful of how I show up as a leader. And I'm curious, because you touched on the word a little bit more. If you could expand on how mindfulness kind of shows up, and you touched about it a little bit, but if you can expand.
Yeah, mindfulness is kind of a loaded word these days because everybody has like a different definition, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's probably very important too about leadership is being able to define what you mean when you say something.
I know. Right? Yeah.
Because everybody thinks
a lot of these words are buzzwords.
So glad you're asking me because I think I tend to define things a little differently than most, but who knows?
Please.
Anyway, how I define mindfulness is really being, there's mindfulness and then I guess there's mindful, intentional, deliberate, thoughtful, conscious. Those words, I think I lump all into being mindful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
There's like I mentioned earlier, anyone can be a leader, but leadership can end up being haphazard if you're not mindful. And there are, it takes time and wisdom to kind of develop, I guess, a working mindfulness about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is context related. And you being, let's say, like teaching youth, I've taught high school kids in Japan for over 20 years. And during that time, I've learned that, well, one, it's not about me.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm learning
sure you
that slowly, right?
Your position is totally not about you. So don't make it about you.
Exactly.
It's about them and their expectations. And that's being mindful of realizing that, being aware that it isn't about you.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
It's not.
That a leader can learn as they go, being mindful and aware of their context. And I think this is probably one thing we don't usually talk about is how context defines what you do and say in the situation. Do you know what I mean? Context.
Yeah.
And very few people ask the question of, well, what context am I in? What are the expectations here of me and of them? Is that clear? And if I can be explicit about this context, the framework of what's happening, will it help them learn? Like people a lot of times are kind of confused. Let me give you an example in sports. I know you love sports. You're a basketball guy, right?
Yeah, basketball,
I don't
baseball.
like basketball. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. It's not like I don't like basketball because I just didn't like basketball. It's because I had a bad gym teacher way back then that
exactly
didn't, what I felt well, not looking back, I don't want to judge him, but maybe this is the way he was, But
Right.
I didn't know the game. He just assumed I understood the game. I had no clue what the game was about.
Right.
He's like, here's a ball. What do I do with it? Right?
Yeah. Right.
So, I watched people, okay, they're dribbling and running at the same time. Well, that's a skill. You kind of have to practice, right?
It is.
You don't just
It is.
know how to do that.
No, it's repetition.
Is it repetition,
like
right?
Skill.
Well,
Yeah.
how about a kid that's never done it once? You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but that created a whole bunch of shame around basketball. So,
Yeah.
all the emotions and feelings about that. So I had no clue of the context or understanding what was required of me. And I think the same thing happened to me in baseball. So my experience with sports has been rather kind of feeling ashamed of it, which is unfortunate because I actually love activity and playing games and teams and whatnot.
Games, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think most kids do. They just lack that, what's called, I guess in psychology, self-efficacy, believing that they can do it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was never kind of built up for myself. But yeah.
No, that's a really...
Does that help? I mean, in terms of mindfulness, kind of understanding, being able to stand back and just look at the context and situation and being able to articulate and explain it and communicate that and navigate that with, let's say, the players or whomever is involved.
I resonate with that so much because I think that's a big thing I struggle with when I went from player to coach and I coached like this 7th grade team of beginning basketball players. I would say things and they'd look at me like
what?
I'm like an alien.
Right.
And I was like, I had an aha moment that I had to teach the game, right? Like I couldn't just say words, right? And it's being mindful of the words that you use.
Yeah.
They don't know what the free throw line is.
Right,
they don't
right.
know what the 3-point line is.
Yeah.
They're like, what are you talking about, dude?
Right.
And so now as a youth basketball coach, I'm very mindful because I don't want people to have shame around, the game of basketball or baseball because I want them to, no, they're not all going to play in high school or college or the NBA. Most certainly not.
Yeah.
But I want them to have a positive relationship so they can play some pickup, play some softball when they're adults, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm kind of seeing for them if you're talking about into the future. Because I think physical activity is so important.
Sure.
Right. And being active. So with that and kind of this mindfulness, I'm curious how you brought that with you to Japan and like use that in your, what's the word? Pedagogy in teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of my lessons in teaching have been learned along the way. So don't be too hard on yourself if you don't know it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like learn as you go, as we all do.
Exactly.
It's not like I started knowing anything. I think probably the one lesson that stands out to me when I started teaching when I was 25, like at your age around that time.
Right.
And the students I was teaching was 4 years younger than me. Really? 4 or 5 years younger than me. So they were just graduated. So we were close in age. But there was clearly a role discrepancy. I'm teacher, they are student. And in a formal setting where they're sitting down, I'm standing up in front of them.
Right.
And I do remember thinking, what do I know about teaching? And in a foreign country to people who don't understand a word I'm saying, right? I'm teaching the language that I'm speaking now to them, and they have no clue.
Exactly.
So this immediately is just kind of like, okay, well, all right, well, if I were sitting there, right, how would I view me? So being
putting
able,
yourself
I think,
in their shoes.
Yeah, put yourself in their shoes, One thing I realize is the importance of recognizing role and identity. It didn't matter who I thought, who or what I felt at the moment. What was important for that context was they expected a teacher to know what they were teaching, and to present it in a way that was understandable. And it was my job somehow to make it understandable to them, make sure they got it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
What I learned was I just need to give them their expectation. Like fulfill their expectation. They expect a teacher to be a certain way, to act a certain way. And so I realized what I was having to do was to take on a role. Right? And then, okay, like, what does it mean to act like a teacher that they expect? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, that was kind of my follow-up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, what does it mean? You know, how do I be a teacher that, even though they don't understand my language, but by my nonverbal communication, which I learned, nonverbal, right,
big,
is really how they will understand.
Right.
So, being a teacher really is a performance art in many ways.
It is. Yeah.
Right? And so, I think whenever we are in those kinds of positions, like teacher, leaders, coach, boss, people are watching, right? They're watching. Always watching.
Always.
You know, they're seeing what Coach Justin is doing there. What's he doing? You know,
right.
How is he treating other players? Like they're watching, right? So it just dawned on me that my teaching went beyond words, what I was giving them.
Yeah.
It was really more about me being a teacher, you know, being a good model of a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you recognize that, like what came about? What did you start shifting some of your behavior? Like, I'm kind of curious because I don't know if what the expectations are as an English teacher in a foreign country versus like, you know, being an English teacher here in the United States. Was there a certain,
sure.
You know,
yeah.
What were you learning in that process?
It's scary I think there's a certain scariness about approaching a foreigner.
Yeah.
Where if you're trying to communicate, you can't really. You don't feel like you can.
Right.
What I realized with language learners, at least the Japanese, is a great desire to connect with you, but they're scared to death to do it.
Yeah. Right.
So how do you bridge that for them?
Yeah.
Right? How do you create a space and a context for them to feel that that making a mistake in communication with words doesn't matter. Yeah. I'd rather you try it and just totally mess up and fall flat on your face than not to do anything at all. So I tell them, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Just make them all. I'm like, make all your mistakes in this room. Right?
Exactly.
And then, so that when you get out there, you have less mistakes. Just do it all here. Right? So yeah, I think for myself, really trying to eliminate fear or the opportunity for fear and just create safety and security for them so they can learn and try.
Yeah.
I think it's so important with the sports, you know, everybody's testing their ability, and wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, I'd like to say if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying, right? Because that means you're not pushing yourself. You're not trying anything new. You're just staying the same. Right.
Yeah.
And I think I was running like a part in the Boys and Girls Club last year when I was doing a basketball program.
Oh, nice.
I would make them yell, I love mistakes, you know, to try and get that ingrained, because it's not ingrained, right? They want to make every shot. They want to make sure they dribble all the time and never get the ball stolen. And, you know, sometimes it is, you know, parents that are putting a lot of pressure, and that's probably a whole nother conversation. But I think creating the safe space, it is a responsibility of the teacher and a coach.
Yeah, very much so.
So kind of going into, I think where I really was hoping to, and where I just really valued your tweets and what you were putting out into the world, and something that's important to me is I want to kind of begin with it with the cross-cultural connection and bridge that you were able to do. But I also want to kind of move it into kind of the polarization of the world we live in. And, like being able to have civic conversations and dialogue with people we disagree with. But I kind of want to start with the lens of how you did that in Japan first, and then we can take a plane and come back to America and talk a little bit of civic engagement and conversations from there.
I actually really appreciated my time in Japan, if anything, to give me a perspective of America. I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois.
Okay. Right.
And then I moved to California and stayed there for my school years before moving to Japan. Growing up in the Midwest, I had my experiences of being Asian in an all white community, which was, I had to deal with that. Even dealing with growing up in a bicultural home. I'm Chinese. So when I went to Japan, I was just sort of disassociated with my own ethnicity. I don't know if you can understand. It's very difficult it's hard for me to explain. It's kind of like I grew up in a white community. And kids want to belong. So I kind of didn't want to think about my Asianness. I didn't. It was kind of I tried to block it out, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously that happened.
Right.
It really shocked me when I got to California because there's so many more Asians. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Where did all these Asians come from? I guess I'm Asian American. Right.
Right.
So especially going to the university there, everybody's like maybe 50% Asian. I'm like, oh my God. And I felt out of place.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Japan,
interesting. Yeah.
Well, everybody's Asian, right? But they're not just Asian.
Right.
Here's the deal. I was like, they're Japanese, and I'm not Japanese.
Right.
I look Asian.
Right. And
as long as I keep my mouth shut and don't smile or anything, no facial expressions, because it's very American to have facial expressions, I guess. We're like walking around and smiling.
Right. Yeah.
But most Japanese are like, just expressionless. Walking through the station. I realized I had to deal with the whole ethnicity thing. Anyway, from that frame of lens, I gravitated toward, my American identity, being in Japan.
Okay.
Because everybody else also wanted, oh, you look Asian, so you're kind of comfortable. So let me talk to you a little bit more about, America, what's life in America like. And, but from my perspective, because I was gravitating more toward being American, it made me question, what does it mean for me to be American, right? And I was following, everything as I was watching, I think that was back in, I guess internet really was my connection to America, back in the States. And I was noticing as Twitter and Facebook and everything else was coming up, the polarity was getting worse and worse.
Right.
I find myself, this morning I actually tweeted something about Twitter. I said, Twitter is like a river.
I did see.
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I'm like, Twitter's like this river, and I try my darndest to stand on the banks of the river, watching the river go by. Right. And I'll notice things, and I realize that many people just wade into the river and get washed down the stream. Like they just go with it, and they can't control it, themselves anymore. And I see how dangerous that is. That we get washed in the fear, scarcity talks, the outrage. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I feel that social media is really important and a very powerful tool, but at the same time, with this kind of mindless using it, thoughtless way of approaching it, you can get really stuck going with the current. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely can get stuck going with the current. And I think number one, it's great to connect, right? We wouldn't know each other without Twitter,
Exactly.
right? We wouldn't be on this call. We wouldn't be on this conversation. But at the same time, I think it kind of goes back to being mindful in the leadership, because if you use Twitter just to use it and you're not thinking about why you're using it or being mindful
I think
of
what you just
how
said
you,
is so important. Why are you using
yeah,
what you're
expand.
using, right? Yeah.
Yeah, why are you using it?
Yeah.
And are you just going to show up and just, berate other people? And this is the other thing. Like, I'm not sure if you've seen the documentary on Netflix. Oh, what's it called? It's a tech documentary, and it's talking about
Social
the
dilemma?
polarity and, yep, social dilemma.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And just like, it's so easy to be in your own echo chambers. And
Yeah.
then, if this person thinks this, they're a terrible human being. And
Yes.
this person's terrible, then everyone's going to bring down America. It's just like, it is like, I want there to be more civic engagement and dialogue, not shouting and yelling. What does that accomplish, right?
The shouting, yeah. So let me ask you, do you think Twitter is a platform that would facilitate that? That kind of the engagement that you're talking about?
And probably not. But,
is there an alternative?
Yeah, what is the alternative?
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. But I do think, I feel like there just needs to be almost, at least let's focus on the youth, right? Because they're still learning, right? Is there a way that we could teach, kids or young users of the internet, or really all humans, that you are engaging with another human behind a screen, right? I think that's what a lot of people forget, is that, like, they see a profile picture, they see this, they see, a couple emojis, and they assume something about someone's story that they have never even.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't know. Is it possible? Like, I don't know the psychology behind it, right? Like, I'm just a dude talking about this right now.
I hear you. You're asking the important questions. Is it like, how do we address this? I've thought a lot about it as well. I think when I get into a teacher mode and think about how I can help my kids navigate it. I think teaching empathy is probably the most necessary skill we need for leaders of kids and youth. And being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, right? I mean, that's what the leader's doing anyway. I mean, for themselves and trying to help these kids. And what you realize is, when you're dealing with people through a screen, you lack a certain empathy there. I mean, there's a wall that makes it difficult to have empathy.
Right.
Like, they're not real, Yeah. And it's kind of hard to navigate, because there's so many things that on TV through the screen that isn't real.
No.
I mean,
a lot of things aren't real.
Yeah. So you kind of, I worry about my nephew. Like, he's growing up seeing me through screen. Uncle Ian is through a screen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's no, the only, like, last week when he came to visit was the first time I actually met him face to face. But other than that, it's just life through a screen, or knowing his uncle through a screen. How does that affect children growing up? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know, but I do know that the physical, that's why I love coaching and, like, working with youth in person, is because I feel like that human connection, it can never be replaced.
Yeah.
And I believe, like, the human connection is necessary. And also, it's really important to have social media and be able to connect and have these conversations where you're in Vegas and I'm in LA. Yeah. Right. Like, I think that's great, but I don't know. Maybe this is just a cosm of society, and it being everything needing to be so fast, right? It's hard to go places and have an actual civic dialogue and conversation. That takes me driving to City Hall and taking 2 hours of my time.
Convenience plays into it, huh?
Yeah, convenience is definitely, I feel like, a big thing.
Back in, I guess, in the Greek history time, they had the forum where people would, just go and discuss, right?
Right.
And I think for a long time, our society before internet, what do? We had, like, coffee shops, and we hang out at the mall,
Yeah.
or, you know,
Yeah.
stuff like that, where we would have these kinds of discussions. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if did you hear about the news where Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Recently. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I mean, I'm having mixed thoughts on Elon, because I mean, he's a great innovative guy, but at the same time, I almost, as the humanitarian in me is like, why are you spending resources to send, people with ultra wealth to another Mars and colonize another planet versus when we have like,
issues
hungry people
here.
here in LA, at Skid Row, what we talked about the other day. It's like, why can't we use some of those resources? And like, I'm a person that believes in, in businesses and the power of the private sector. I'm not someone that wants, the public sector to have control of everything. And I do believe in innovation and investments, right? But I just believe also in so much in human potential and investing in people as well.
Right. Well, he's always been somewhat of a free speech absolutist, believing that, and some think that he wants to take Twitter and just like open up and stop all the I won't say censoring, but the curating of certain tweets and tweaking the algorithms or whatnot. Kind of along the point you brought up about polarity. Do you think an all free Twitter would be good for society, where anyone can post and say anything without being deleted, moderated?
That's a great question. Yeah. Like, cancel culture. I'm not a huge fan of cancel culture, but I also don't want to sit here and let people spew, racist or misogynist or, the list goes on, like
left and right.
Yeah. Disinformation. Exactly. Like, you shouldn't be able to spread that rampantly.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that has to be somewhat regulated and moderated.
Right.
But like, who does it, right? What are their political backgrounds, right? I think sometimes, people on the right, get upset because, they are probably more moderated than others. And this is a very slippery slope, right? But at the same time, I just like, I want to have more civic dialogue. But I guess the real question is how.
Yeah. And in a way that is respectful, constructive.
Exactly.
Right?
Constructive.
Yeah, and productive. I mean, a lot of times, like you said, we have a lot of yelling back and forth these days, calling names, which is unfortunate.
And I think that key word is respect.
Respect.
Right? Like, you just have to respect the other person, and saying derogatory terms about other human beings is not respectful.
Yeah.
Like, that's not respectful. And I feel like civic dialogue and engagement has to be respectful on Twitter or in person. Doesn't matter.
On that point, I was thinking about, well, in the past, when you say something not respectful, what happens to you? You get shamed, right? Social shame, or somehow punished.
Right.
It would seem that nowadays, if we don't have that tool to shame someone or to punish someone, they'll just continue doing it, right?
Right.
Well, what tools do we have now? Moderation, kicking them off the platform. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I feel like we're getting to a point where we might be losing some of those tools.
Yeah.
I mean, we have politicians saying like whatever the heck they want.
The bleep, yeah,
right?
Yeah, whatever they want, literally whatever.
And they can get away with it.
No repercussions.
Yeah, no repercussions. So you can't have I don't think you can have a civil society where that happens.
No.
When one side of the conversation decides, I'm going to just ignore all the rules that are of typical convention of communicating.
Yeah.
Well, we can't have a society that way.
No.
I think part of when I try to engage on Twitter, I get sucked in myself. So I understand the temptation. Yeah. I'm human. But
Right.
I also try kind of to stand back and take a look. What's happening here? What are they trying to do, this person? And point it out to other people who might. I'm just going to throw it out there. This is what I see. This guy's trying to gaslight you. He's saying this to push your buttons.
Right.
Be aware of that, just so you know.
Just be mindful.
Yeah.
Be aware.
But most, a lot of people get, he called me a name, so I'm going to call him a name back. And, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just go crazy.
Yeah. And the circle never ends.
Yeah.
And the circle never ends.
But I don't know. Is there some way to devise some way of red light warning? This is a gaslighting post.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't know. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
It is a challenge. It is most certainly a challenge. And I just wanted to have a conversation. I didn't necessarily say we need to have the answer for it. Yeah, no
We're
solutions.
not solving the problem. Hey, if we can solve the problem, buddy.
Yeah, us too. We're taking on the world.
That's right.
But I do think, kind of as we wrap up this conversation, we can control what we can control, and we can do our part to have civic dialogue on Twitter and in person.
Yeah, and I think if we can model that empathy and mutual respect for people, like I said, I think at the end of the day, it's really empathy. You're other human being. We can't be desensitized to them not hurting, or them, desensitized to not understanding them, or they're feeling their pain. I think that's probably the main focus that I think, at least I try to focus on, is just have empathy.
Yeah. Have empathy. No, I love that. And so with our last section here, what final advice do you have to the young leaders and young coaches that are listening to this podcast? Any resources you want to share, and where can people find and engage with you?
All right. Advice, eh? Well, a practical way of building empathy, I think, would be to teach kids to ascribe positive regard for someone. That everybody has a story. Everybody's pretty much winging life, kind of going through it and learning as they go. And everyone's trying to do their best. Everybody wants to do their best, right? And everybody wants to experience the best. But everybody also may feel that they lack certain choices, or that this is the only one I have, and this is why I do what I do. Like they don't have enough options. But I think that's a great reminder for myself and for any leader or teachers. Just regard everybody positively. That there's positive intention in what they're doing. They may be acting like an idiot. They may be making choices that are horrendous to themselves or others. But you know what? They're probably doing that because they're in pain, or they're suffering, or it's a cry for help somehow, But give them the positive intent, the sense that they're doing this because they want a better life somehow. I mean, not the best choice necessarily, but hey, they still want the best life.
Right.
I think that's probably my advice, is really see everybody with a positive sense, positive eye.
I remember one of the first people I interviewed, she said that she always tries to find at least one positive trait of each person that she works with. And I was like, I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
So any resources and where can people connect with you?
Resources for empathy. I wish I had some of those.
Empathy, mindful leadership, anything we talked about today.
There's one place called consciousleadership.io, I think it is. Look up Conscious Leadership. They're a great resource for what it means to lead consciously, and what, like I said earlier, consciously being thoughtful, deliberately intentional type of leadership.
Yeah.
Not reactive, but proactive.
Absolutely.
That's a great website.
I'll have to hit them up and get someone on a podcast interview.
I would recommend it. That'd be great. If you want to contact me, you can get me at on Twitter, which is twitter.com at Ian Shen, my name, IANSHEN. That's fine.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ian. I enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise.
I know the listeners did as well.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.